Let us pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts find favor in your ear, our rock and our salvation. From the stories of our childhood to the memories shared with our grandparents and great-grandparents, narrative prose, or a story like the one we find read to us in Genesis this morning, follows us all of our lives. Such stories that we hear enable us to learn, cause us to laugh, or sometimes free us to cry. And the Hebrew Bible, what we call most of the time the Old Testament, is filled with these narrative stories that invite us in to a way that might be a little different than what some of the Greek understanding that we have interpreted in the New Testament brings to us. It helps us experience God, each other, and the world around us. There's a couple of distinctives about the Hebrew narrative that are a little different about the ways that we tell stories. Usually, we spend quite a bit of time just doing descriptive pieces in our stories. Usually, there's a cast of characters that are all interacting with each other. But in most of the Hebrew narrative, there's very little description. It's short, it's succinct, as we just heard read, and I'll say again. And usually, there's only two people on stage at the same time. And if there's more than two people in a group, they speak as one voice, like Joseph's brothers, as an example, spoke in one voice. So there's direct dialogue that happens between the characters in the story. Our story tells us about three characters: Abraham, Sarah, and the three visitors, strangers. Abraham characterizes the ancient Middle Eastern culture where hospitality, as we've heard before, especially in the story on the road to Emmaus, is not only expected of people, but my friends, it's required. It is one of the worst things you can do in Hebrew and ancient times to not show hospitality to the strangers among us. Sarah lets us laugh and lets us ask questions at the same time of seeing absolute absurdities about some of the information that we hear. And the three strangers that come remind us that God will be God, that God will remain outside of a box of our heads, and that God will remain a mystery. So let's go into the story. Near the oaks of Mamre, short description, Abraham sat at the front of the tent in the heat of the day when he sees those three strangers coming. What does he do? He immediately springs into action. He runs to meet them. He bows down to them. This is the courtesy also, as is the welcoming and hospitality. He brings water to wash their feet. He offers a morsel of bread, and then he gets Sarah scooting around too, asking her to quickly bake the cakes. And then Abraham rushes out to the field and gets the servant going and ready to prepare the fine calf. And he even in the meantime had time to make curds and whey before the three strangers. Then he just stands by and he relaxes near the oak tree and enjoys his picture of the hospitality. This is over-the-top hospitality. The Hebrew verbs in this story genuinely get translated as frantically running to and fro, getting this meal together. because he was desperate to show, please, 3 strangers, stay here, be a part of my hospitality to you. According to John Sachs, the chief rabbi of Great Britain, the Hebrew Bible contains really only one commandment, to love our neighbors, but it contains no less than 36 commandments to love the stranger. In other words, we are invited through these stories to be hospitable to people that we do not know. Throughout the Torah, the reason given is that the Israelites themselves were once strangers. In Exodus 23:9, we read, "You know the feelings of being a stranger, having yourselves been a stranger in the land of Egypt." So they remember. In our Christian tradition, in the letter to the Hebrews, the writer directs them, do not neglect showing hospitality to the strangers. So by so doing, some have entertained angels without knowing it. This is over-the-top hospitality. It is demonstrated in his frantic preparation, and it's demonstrated in the stories of the tradition. And we are told that even by showing hospitality to strangers, that we might be showing hospitality to God. Well, today we don't sit in our tents, obviously, and we don't have folks that travel on foot, obviously. And yet, we do show hospitality. You show hospitality here at Reskov. Think of the ways that you show hospitality, first to strangers. One is the warming center that shows hospitality the 2nd and 4th Fridays. There are strangers who are here and receiving the hospitality. You in the past, and I think probably looking ahead, will do more supporting of refugee families, haven't you? This is hospitality to strangers. You invite and say every morning and every time that all are welcome here, and that all of each of us is welcome here. That is welcoming everyone. Each child is welcome just as they are. Each of you, each of us is welcomed just as you are. These welcomes that are here, right in this congregation, that as a stranger coming in, I want you to know it's genuine. You really do that. And as you welcome more and more into your community, you do that as you welcome the strangers that may come in. But you also welcome each other. And I think another way to look at this hospitality that was so infamous in the ancient culture is that an intimate or church family or our families or extended families provides for us the depth of hospitality. It gives us the strong base to show among ourselves the love and the strength that it takes to be able to reach out to others, strangers among us, with love and care. And the reason we can do this is because of the radical, absolutely radical hospitality that God offers to each of us. We have been given a gift of generosity that knows no bounds. On this Father's Day, I decided that I really wanted to, I guess, take a risk in some ways of sharing with you a story that I was shown radical care, hospitality, and love. And it was a turning point in my own journey in my faith. I had married very young, just out of college, and in only about a year's time in this marriage, it was very obvious to me that it was not going to work. There was no way that no matter what I did, I had married out of my values, I had married for the wrong reasons, and I knew that it was not going to last. Honestly, I knew it kind of before the wedding, but I still went through with it because everything was all set and all prepared. I knew, however, that a divorce was on its way. Where I grew up was in a very small rural community in southwestern Iowa. It was it was a covenant church, but its theological bend went more toward fundamentalism than for some of the other covenant churches that we know. And there were two behaviors for young women that were the most shameful and inexcusable, and in many instances ended up being unforgivable. To get pregnant before you were married, and secondly, to get a divorce. Well, I went from Chicago and traveled to Iowa to tell my parents that I was going to get a divorce. I first entered and told my mom, and we, of course, cried. And being a typical mother, she wondered where she had failed. After assuring her it was not her fault, it was mine. But I could not tell my dad. I just couldn't. I was so frightened. At that point, I had a very, let's say, unredeemed, unhealed, unexplored, underdeveloped theology of who this generous, hospitable God is. I'd been home for 4 days, and I needed to get back. I was teaching at the time, and I needed to get back. So the night before I needed to leave the next day, it was about 10:30 p.m., which was always the time that Dad went up the stairs to go to bed. And he was halfway up the stairs, and my mother gave me that look that both mothers and dads can do, but yeah, probably especially moms. So I called my dad back down the stairs, and with every broken piece of my voice and with every broken piece of me, I told him my truth. And my daddy was a very quiet man, so he said nothing as he descended the stairs. But he simply came to me and he held out his arms and he said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. This much must hurt so much." I didn't expect that. I didn't deserve it. But it was God's unrelenting, welcoming hospitality for all of us, wherever we have been, no matter who we are. And some of these old ancient Hebrew stories, over and over and over again, keep reminding us of the depth of this hospitality from our God. This engulfing, urgent, frantic, running, screaming Abraham is all about how strongly our God reaches out to us. Now, our friend Sarah, however, responds a little differently, doesn't she? You gotta love Sarah. She does what she's supposed to do. She bakes the cakes and she scurries around with Abraham and fulfills her duties there. But obviously the main behavior we're invited to share with Sarah is that she laughs. Now in Genesis 17, another narrative story right before this one, we learn that Abraham is 100 years old and that Sarah is 90 years old. Okay, think of your great-grandparents, think of your grandparents, think of whomever you want to, but think of someone at that age hearing they're going to have a baby. I'd be laughing my head off too. And she says, me have pleasure? This guy's old, he's an old goat, I'm an old goat. What are we promising? This is a promise I cannot accept. It is absolutely beyond belief. And in our culture right now, we need data, we need proof, we need everything that shows us just what it is that is going to happen. And this simply is a message to Sarah that this is for real. You are going to have a baby. So what is this laugh? Commentators for many generations have made Sarah be kind of a bad person, to be really honest. That oh, Sarah, you have little faith, don't you believe? Why would you laugh? Was it disbelief? Disillusionment? Was it surprise? Was it glee? Frankly, we don't know. I must confess to you, another just little piece of a story is that seminary many years ago in an exegesis of Genesis class, our professor always divided us into teams. And I joined up with a woman who has since become an extremely dear friend. And we wrote, I think it was 60, 70-page paper on this text. And a good 20 pages of that was about Sarah laughing. I can genuinely tell you, we don't know why Sarah laughed, but she has permission to laugh. So I wonder more if what this scene does with the character of Sarah simply invites us to be ourselves with wherever we are. It invites us to be our imperfect, disbelieving human selves, giggling, questioning, responding honestly, and then what'd she do? She lied. I didn't laugh. You didn't hear me. It's kind of like, don't believe your ears with what you heard. We can leave Sarah not knowing why she laughed, but I think really receiving that it's okay to be with wherever we are questioning, with wherever we are wondering, with wherever we can see something so beautiful that has happened in our lives that it's almost beyond disbelief. So we close now with the three strangers. Is this the precursor to the Trinity? Again, volumes are written on whether or not this translates into the three strangers, the three visitors at the Oaks of Mamre, visiting Abraham and Sarah. Is that what's to come in the Trinity? We don't know. Is it really number three speaker that spoke? It's who's representing God? And there were these other guys were angels around the speaker? We don't know that either. And I wonder sometimes if it's on purpose that some of these stories leave so many questions, because that leaves us in the freedom to know that God will be God, and that really we can ask the question, is anything possible, impossible for God? Is anything too marvelous for God? Yet today, is it? Amen.